Hello everyone and welcome to the highlight show of Clash Chess International. My name is Tatev Abrahamyan and I'm going to take you to the key moments of day 7. Today was also day 1 of the finals, so after 6 days of very exciting matches we finally have Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana facing off in the finals. So the world number 1 against the world number 2, this great rivalry that they have going since their world championship match. So of course this is a match that everyone was looking forward to, the big face-off, and it really lived up to all the hype. So today's games were really amazing, some high quality games, many ups and downs, some really exciting moments, and what a thriller it was. So I won't spoil it for you what happened, so we'll go round by round and I will tell you exactly what happened. So with that said, let's jump right into the action. So let's start with the first game. So Magnus Carlsen starts with the English. And the reason I'm showing you the opening is because something very interesting happened on move 7. So we're at move 6 for black. So if I gave you this position and ask you to guess what would white play in this position, I don't think anyone would be able to guess the move. So white's move was king f2. And I'm not really sure what to say about this move, but you know, since Magnus played it, then we should all agree that this is a playable move. So Fabiano continues c6, logical move. So we're still in the opening phase of the game, so again, I'm not going to comment on every single move, we're just going to reach the key moment. So players still developing. Magnus did get a big edge in this position, and I will point out when. So his position is already improving. Rook's coming into play, king goes back, doesn't need to be on f2 anymore, so this is what we call castle by hand, that instead of castling you play like king f2, rook e1, king goes to g1. Takes 3 moves, but gets the job done. Doubling the rooks on the e-file. I really like how Magnus plays it. It's simply move by move, improving his position. I love this queen on e4, this knight on d5, expanding on the king side where he has the pawn majority. Slow improvements, exchanging the queens, entering an endgame. And this is where Fabiano made an error. He played rook g8. Instead, he needs to play d3, which looks like a bad move because king comes and gets the pawn, but there's this amazing resource of knight b4. The point is, you cannot take my knight because after d2, who is stopping this pawn? So this would be very unfortunate. So instead, the rook needs to swing to to the side of the board, let's say here. Check. And all these pawns are going to get exchanged. So the king has to go back to stop this pawn. I will take your f5 pawn, you will go after my a pawn, and everything will get exchanged and we'll shake hands. But this did not happen. So Fabiano goes rook g8 and finds himself in some hot water. So rook h6. So there's another key moment that we're going to reach in this game. So there's still a lot of adventures. So decides to push the pawn. So now Magnus is up a pawn, but then for some reason he blundered or miscalculated. So instead of defending this pawn on c4 with a move like rook d4, he decides to go king e5. And after check, he just simply lost the pawn. And now there's just nothing to play for. So I will just take you to the end of the game. So basically they exchange everything here. So there's no need for me to do any to make any comments. So literally everything is coming off the board. I mean, we're already here, so let's see what happened. Okay, so now they just repeat. So in the post-game interview, Fabio said that he was lucky to escape with a draw, and he was, because objectively he was in a very tough position, and Magnus, you know, could have nursed that advantage and won the game, and this is something that Magnus is very good at doing. So let's jump to our second game where Fabiano has the white pieces. So this was a Royal Lopez. So in this position, Fabiano decides to go for the endgame, and Magnus easily neutralizes the position and the pieces come off. So I'm not really going to focus on this game because it's quite a long game, but there isn't a lot of action. They basically exchange everything. So I was looking at it with an engine, and I'm not sure why actually engine really prefers queen c2 and gives white a big edge. I think maybe it's because the poor pawn structure and this knight center, but I think there's still a lot of fight left in the opening. in the position. And but I do think this was maybe a better try for white to go for and try to play for the advantage here. Instead, he exchanges queens, d5, and a lot of exchanges. So we'll see all these pieces start coming off soon. So again, this game lasted for another 30-something moves, and we don't need to look at it. So let's jump to our third game, which was the most exciting game of the round. Okay, I shouldn't say it was the most exciting, but it was the start of the most the excitement. On move 25, we did see an amazing move, which just destroys black's position entirely. So black's last move was to go queen c8, getting out of pin, makes sense. And now comes f5. Amazing move, just crushes the position. Again, this concept of attacking on the most defended square. So, you know, f5 is defended by 2 pawns. So when a square is defended by 2 pawns, you just think nothing can happen there because it's such a secure square. But turns out that there is no good way of reacting to this move. So he played g takes f5, and actually it's funny because e takes f5 just puts up no resistance, because after take, queen d5, everyone is hanging. Knight is hanging, pawn is hanging. It's actually impossible to defend the knight, so the knight has to move. But the knight doesn't have a square to go to, you cannot go to d8. Rook is hanging. If you go here, I'm gonna take, and the rook is hanging again. So already the position is just resignable. So instead, Fabiano tries to put up a fight. So he takes with the pawn. Cannot call this a sacrifice, an exchange. Takes on h5, now threatening mate on f7 and h7. So defense. And we see, or maybe we don't see, but now we see that the pawn on g3 is hanging. And maybe natural move that occurs to you is to play king g2. But instead, Magnus decides, I don't need this pawn, and he just takes on d5. Which is such a remarkable move, because you know you're hanging a pawn next to your king with a check, and it just looks so scary. Just you know, if you don't really dig deep, it feels like immediately you should dismiss it, takes d5, and immediately try to defend that pawn. But let's take a look at what happened. So if queen g3, the king goes here, and now we're threatening mate again. So now the queen has to go back. And now there's actually a very pretty line in this position. So there are a lot of ways for white to play, of course. But let's take a look at this one. So queen h7 check, queen h6. So if the king goes to g8, rook g1 is coming with all kinds of mates. If king runs, this e6 pawn is falling. So bishop g7 looks like the logical move. And check out this really pretty line. Knight h7, knight f6, cannot take because mate. So king has to go to f8, and now queen g7. Cannot take, or I guess no other good option, but if you take, knight e8, and everyone hangs. What a way to finish the game, huh? Unfortunately, this didn't happen, but the way the game ended was also very nice. So c takes d5. So Fabiano, of course, decides not to go for this kind of misadventures. So he goes rook e7. Objectively, the position is just lost. So takes on e6. Pins the bishop. Check. Just comes back, and no way to defend the piece. So he resigns. So a really unfortunate way for Fabiano to start this match with a loss in round 3. So there was one more game to go before the clutch game. So of course it's a very tough situation to be in, playing Magnus Carlsen when you're behind when you know you're trailing him, because once he gets the advantage, he doesn't really let go. So let's start with this position. So if we take a look, this position is just absolutely crazy. King is not safe, king is not safe. Black's last move was a5, weakening the king even more. So Fabiano goes queen e7, which to me was kind of a weird move, because where's the queen going? Feels like the queen should stay on this side. Ask the bishop where the bishop wants to go. So the bishop doesn't necessarily want to go to c5, because that's where the knight wants to go. So if you put the bishop here, then your knight cannot move, so maybe the bishop has to go back. But now white can think about moving the knight to d2 or e1 and bringing the queen to h3, and the pawn structure is ugly for everyone. If we look, cannot pinpoint to a healthy pawn in this position, so everything is just hanging, everything is loose. But I don't see how black is gonna go after this king, but this king on the other hand looks very unsafe to me, so I would say white is doing really well here. So queen e7, so rook d8, d8. So we're going to enter an endgame. So a lot of exchanges are happening. So white is up a pawn, but as I mentioned, this pawn structure is just hideous, and you do have this double c pawn, so because they're all isolated, it's almost like you're not up a pawn. But of course we don't really think of it that way, because in any kind of king and pawn endgame this would be very relevant. So white is still up a pawn. Not the best pawn, but a pawn is a pawn. So pushes the pawn, so we see more exchanges. So looking at this position, looks like we're entering the draw territory, but again, up a pawn can keep playing forever. So the knight goes there, and we see this king d6, very strange move. Looks logical, but unfortunately it runs into a very simple tactic, and the reason I say strange move is because we're not really used to seeing Magnus blunder this kind of tactics. And now the knight on g4 is hanging, and black immediately finds himself in a lost endgame and resigns very few moves later. So let's check it out. a3, stopping the king from entering. If you remember yesterday's game of Levan Aronian versus Magnus Carlsen, where Magnus gave up the exchange and the king ran to the queen side and took everything basically. You remember that game, don't let the king in. Rook slides over, the king is cut off, and you just push the pawn. There's nothing to do. And the game ended here. White wins in view of it's just impossible to stop this pawn. The king can go... Okay, let's make a few moves. For example, here. And hopefully you know this little trick. So you check and put a rook behind the pawn. And now you're just going to be up at least a rook, most likely a queen. So now the match is tight. Talk about a clutch game. So this is not the clutch game, but still a clutch victory, right? You're down a point, trailing Magnus, and then you win the very next game, and now the match is tight. So now we're entering the clutch game. So if it's your first time watching this, the clutch games are the games that are worth more points. So because this is the first day, the clutch games are worth 2 points. So let's jump to move 21. So this was a remarkable game, and really heartbreaking what happened. So of course already you can see that Magnus won because it says 1-0 on your screen. But let's take a look through the game. So rook g4. Of course, very logical move, attacking this g7 pawn, and we would think that Fabiano would play f6, but he plays this knight d4, which is such a stunning move to understand this game, the position so deeply, giving up this pawn, centralizing the queen, threatening to go rook e2, and basically saying your rook is silly, is just trapped. So Magnus goes f3, rook comes here, rook comes into the game, and again, it looks very scary because it looks like this rook and the queen are attacking, but in fact the queen is just tied down to the rook, and the rook is not really doing much on g7 because of the placement on the f5 queen. So some checks. Trade. So we enter this rook, this queen endgame. So now they're just moving, trying to create something. So now we're going to see another key moment here, and a little bit heartbreaking how this game ended. So check, and a5, and here Fabiano made this crucial mistake of taking. Instead he should play something like queen f4, keeping an eye out on this pawn, because this queen is a little bit tied down, defending this pawn. If you put a queen on f4, you're asking your opponent how you're defending the d4 pawn, posing some problems. Instead he took, and now Magnus just collects all these pawns. So king runs back, and now c4. And c4 is a very nice move, and you cannot take because this endgame is just lost with these two passed pawns. No one is stopping them. You're just not on time to stop this pawn. So you go here, I push, your king gets distracting the other pawn queen, so it's just impossible. Your king cannot stop pawns so far away from each other. Okay, so let's go back to the game. So he plays, after c4 he plays queen g4. Pushes his pawn. So, okay, black can still fight by going back with the king, but, you know, when it rains, it pours. King g5, trading down into a lost endgame by a tempo. He resigns here in view of f2 and c8 queen. Of course, this is just game over. It doesn't matter that you have a bishop pawn because there are so many other pawns on the board. So very difficult loss for Fabiano Caruana, losing a clutch game and falling 2 points behind Magnus Carlsen. And now we have one more game left in the day. So let's take a look at this game. So this was another crazy position. So if you remember the other game we saw, game 2, this should be reminiscent of that game. So b3 was played, c takes d3, d5, and now castle. Not taking back, trying to open up the d file, and basically saying your d3 pawn is mine. So rook c1 was played. So Fabiano decides to give up the exchange. Knight c5 and f6. And this is the moment where everything turned, all the tables turned, because in the post-game interview, Magnus said that he did not predict this move, he didn't see it coming, and he just didn't react well to it. And here, he just blunders basically, and things really start to fall apart for him. So he goes bishop b5, a4. So now the knight comes here. Takes, knight e5, and knight e5 is a really nice move, cannot touch the knight. There goes the queen. And now the c6 pawn is not doing too well. Bishop is ready to join the attack, and white's king is a lot safer than this guy. So queen b7 was played. Takes. So it took, so Fabiano, and after post-game interview, admitted that it was difficult to win this position. When we look at it, it doesn't look that difficult, but I guess when he was playing it, he felt maybe he's letting it go, or, you know, he felt this pressure, this resistance from Magnus. But I think this happens a lot when we look at a game and it's, you know, when these top players play, they make it look so easy, but we don't understand like the real struggle that goes behind it. So queen goes back. And white starts collecting everything. So now we're going to enter an endgame. Trading the queens, and let's check out this technique by Fabiano Caruana. He played very precise here. The king comes in. So worth mentioning that at no point can you take this guy, because the pawn runs, so you have to stay in the square. So h5, king h4, and bishop d6, and the bishop just defends everything. And this is why bishops are so good when there's action on both sides of the board, because they can defend both sides, and the knight can become pretty useless. And he goes here, and Magnus Carlsen resigns, because if you take, there's no stopping the pawn. Otherwise, I'm going to take this f5 pawn, and I'm going to have, once again, have pass pawns on both sides of the board, and you just cannot deal with that. And with this, now the match is tied 4-4, and talk about a clutch victory. Fabiano Caruana twice coming back from a loss to win the very next game, and what a thriller it was to watch this game. The commentators were going crazy, like the excitement was through the roof. What a match. So in the post-game interview, Fabiano said it was a difficult day for him, and you know, and then he said, what more could you ask for? You know, like who would have expected so many decisive games? And Magnus was quite upset because he felt he could have won this game, and he was doing really well in this game. But he was still feeling very confident because he thinks he's the better player, and he feels that he played better than his opponent. So he feels very disappointed that this better play didn't yield more results for him. So thank you everyone for watching. Tomorrow is going to be the final game of this tournament. So the next 6 games between these two players are going to be played tomorrow, and a champion is going to be crowned. So please make sure you're tuning in. You can watch the coverage with Yasser Serevan, Jennifer Shahadi, and Maurice Ashley on our YouTube channel, or you can check it out on US Chess Champs. You can also look through all the games at your own pace or analyze them on either Lead Chess or on US Chess Champs.